Hey everyone, today I want to talk about wintertime storage for my Shelby GT350R. I've had quite a few people ask me how I store my car for the wintertime because I live up in the Northeast. So typically from about December to March, I'll store the car in the garage and won't use it just because of the harsh weather and the salt on the roads. So I just want to cover a couple of tried and true things I've done throughout the years for my various vehicles that have always worked well for me. First thing I want to talk about is the facility that you will be storing your vehicle in. Obviously, a enclosed garage is going to be the best thing. If you don't have access to an enclosed garage, you can always rent a storage unit for the wintertime. You can also buy one of those buildable tents that basically have metal frames and fabric shells on them just to help keep the snow, the water, the UV light off of the car. You can also obviously do a cover if you have to store it outside. With covers, you want to be careful. You want to make sure the cover fits snug to the car so it's not rubbing up against the car and causing abrasions on the paint. But obviously this is going to be dependent on what you have access to. The next thing is going to be obviously a temperature controlled area is going to be the best to keep any temperature fluctuations from causing moisture and humidity buildups if you're able to do that. And with humidity, there's obviously a couple ways to combat any humidity buildup. You can obviously get a dehumidifier to pull any moisture or humidity out of the air. If you don't want to do that, don't have access to that, you can always get one of these moisture absorbing tubs for your garage. I keep these in the garage just to absorb any little bit of moisture that does find its way in here. So usually pretty dry, but just throughout the year, I keep these in the garage. These are very inexpensive. You're talking about $10 for one of these large tubs that's designed for a garage or a basement at your local home improvement store. You can also get really small ones as well if you want to keep one in the car and don't want one for the entire storage area itself. One thing you definitely want to be really proactive with is rodent control. With these modern cars, a lot of the wiring harnesses are soy-based, and rodents are attracted to those, and typically they will chew on them, so that can be an extremely expensive and complicated repair to replace a wiring harness if they do start to chew on it. So you really want to be proactive and put any sort of rodent traps out if you're concerned about rodents at all, because you don't want to find out the hard way there were rodents when you thought that there were not any. And then also I will make sure that where the car is stored, the ground it sits on is very, very clean. So when I go to take the car out of the garage in the spring, I'll thoroughly inspect it to find out if there were any leaks developed over the winter or leaks that had previously been occurring that I wasn't aware of. So I can get on top of that right away and immediately. And then as far as how I store the actual vehicle itself, first thing, I always start to store the cars with a full tank of fresh fuel. Keeps any humidity, moisture from accumulating in the fuel tank itself. And obviously fresh gas, as fresh as possible. When I know I'm getting towards the end of the season, I will try to run the tank as low as I can. And then right before it gets stored away, I'll take it to the gas station and put fresh fuel in it. I'll also store it with fuel stabilizer, something like the Stable 360 that's designed to help keep everything nice and clean. Gives you a 1-year time frame to store it. Some of the other products give you more time, but that's more than enough. I'm only storing the car for give or take about 4 months or so. And then when I go to the gas station to fill it up, I will take the fuel stabilizer with me for the final tank of fuel. And on these modern Mustangs, especially anything with these capless fuel tanks, in the trunk here, you will find they have a funnel that comes with the car. So if you run out of gas, you need to put fuel in the car. So I'll take the funnel that it comes with the car, and I will put fuel stabilizer in the tank at the gas station before I put the fresh fuel in. So once I get to the gas station, I'll pull off to the side, put that funnel in here. Fuel stabilizer goes in. I usually put in more than what it needs because you really can't put too much of that stuff in. You're better off having too much than not enough because it's perfectly fine to put extra in. Make sure there's enough in there. Go up to the pumps. That way when it's putting fresh fuel in, it's churning up with the fuel stabilizer. And then when I'm driving home from the gas station, it's putting it through the rest of the fuel system, the injectors, things like that. Unfortunately, the state I live in, there really are no non-ethanol gas pumps. Ethanol has been nothing but problems for vehicles, small engines throughout the years. So some states still have non-ethanol gas available. My state's not one of them, so I pretty much have to deal with this. To buy non-ethanol gas by the gallon is really, really expensive. So I'm not going to end up doing that. So then when I get the car home, I will give it a very, very thorough wash. You want to get any of the contaminants off, any of the garbage junk that you don't want to sit on the car over the winter time. You want to get the brake dust off the wheels. That will can severely damage the finish on the wheels over time. So you want to give the car a very, very thorough cleaning, especially if you put a cover on it. You don't want the that cover rubbing up against any of the dirt or stuff that's any other contaminants that are on the surface of the car, because that will scratch it up also. When I store with the cover on, I usually just leave it on once. I typically won't take it on and off. I don't idle the car in the garage like some people do every week or two. I don't really think that's the best thing to do. I think all you're doing is introducing moisture into the crankcase, because typically sitting idle in the garage really isn't going to get up to full temperature to burn any moisture off inside the engine. So I don't do that. Some people do. I'm against it. So I've never done it before, and I've never had an issue. So I usually just let the car be. I will also, like I did with this, I pumped up the tires. I put some extra pressure in there, so as they start to seep a little bit in the wintertime, they'll still be within spec and help keep the tire nice and round to prevent flat spots, which I don't think is a big deal for only a few months of storage. I think flat spots usually take a little more time to happen than just a few months. I also put a battery tender on all the cars I store. I'll show how I routed mine on this car. These modern cars like this, they do have a low power mode that they will go into, but typically I don't like I don't want the battery to get that low in the first place. So what I like to do is just put a battery tender on it just to keep it topped off, because these batteries are not designed to deep cycle the way some batteries are. So under here, obviously you have the batteries under here. It's underneath a cover. I bolted it to the terminal mounts, ran it under here, and the battery tender hookup is right here. So when I'm not using it, it stays nice and tucked in under this wiring harness. It's away from the exhaust, it's away from the heat, anything damaging. I leave it tucked away right there underneath the strut bar. When I do need it, obviously it's easily accessible. And what's nice about the 350s, which is what I'm going to try to do this year, they have the fender vents here. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to route my battery tender extender very carefully up through the fender and up through here. There's enough gap in the fender here where you can comfortably get the wire up through here, and I'll plug it into here. That way I can leave the hood closed. I can run it out here without touching the paint on the car and scratching the paint. I can run it along underneath the rocker, up along the wall, and up to my to where I connect my battery tender to. Now, one thing I also do with my battery tenders, now they say you can leave them plugged in 100% of the time, always running. I don't like to do that. I don't think it's really necessary. I have an electric timer that I use, like most people will use for holiday lighting. I'll let this thing run every day for about a half hour to an hour, and then it shuts itself off depending on how I set it. So that way the car gets topped off every day, but it's not sitting on the battery tender 100% of the time. So I think that's better to do than just leave it plugged in, because if it does malfunction, overcharges the battery, you're never going to know, and it's basically going to wreck the battery, and these batteries are somewhat expensive. This year I'm also going to do something I've never done before. I bought 4 of these wheel dollies from Harbor Freight. These are just basic, simple Pittsburgh wheel dollies designed for pushing the car around. These are not the jack type, but basically just have to lift up the car and put these underneath. They're good for about 1,500 pounds each. And because my garage has a little bit of a gap, I can push the car right up against the wall to allow myself a little bit more space in here during the winter time. Now, I could basically just drive the car back and forth, kind of wedging it off to the side, but it'd be a little bit more of a pain. And the nice thing about these dollies is if in the winter time I decide, you know what, I want to do a little detailing in the car, a little bit of polishing, whatever I want to do, I can easily just roll the car into the middle of the garage and have plenty of room to work. I can put the car sideways. So if you want to work on your car, detail it, do whatever in the winter time, and you don't want to, you kind of have it stored away, you don't want to have to start it or whatnot, with a wheel dolly like that, you can easily move the car wherever you want to. Still have access to it, still be able to work on it, clean it, whatever you want to do. And then when you're done, you could push it up against the wall as close as you want, and have the maximum amount of space available in your garage. Now, this is obviously going to be dependent on your garage type, single car, 2-car, depending on how big, how much space you have. So if you got a larger garage, a big 2-car, something larger, something like that's nice, so you can put the car exactly where you want it. And then finally, I don't use big, fancy, expensive covers. For indoor storage, you don't need anything crazy. I just use these basic, cheap, throwaway, universal, clear plastic car covers. These are what body shops use. I just do this just to keep the dust off of it, because in the wintertime, after sitting in here for so many months, the car does tend to get dusty and dirty again. So this is going to keep it nice and clean. These are really inexpensive. You're talking 10, 15 bucks for something like this. For a universal fit, they actually fit very well. They have a little bit of a little elastic band on it, so it stays tight to the car. It doesn't really move around, especially in the garage anyway. There's really no air movement in here, so it stays nice and settled, and it keeps the car from getting really dusty over the months and months it'll be sitting here over the winter time. So that's pretty much how I store the car. Nothing crazy, pretty simple. Everything keeps the cars nice and fresh and clean and ready for the next season. A couple special considerations depending on how you're storing your cars. If you're storing them for potentially years and not months, I think that's when you should get into things like putting the car up on blocks, taking them off the wheels, and draining the fuel out of the fuel tank. For a few months in the wintertime, for people that live in the north, I think the stuff I'm doing is perfectly fine. So if you're going to be gone for potentially years or have the car sitting for years, that's when you want to get a little bit more extreme, potentially pull out the battery, get the car off the ground, get all the fuel out of it. But that's a whole nother consideration if you're storing the car for that duration of time. So I'll get the car up and in its fully stored position, and then I'll show you what it's going to be looking like for the next few months. All right, the car is now fully winterized. It's obviously in the cover. It's up on the dollies, and I now gained probably about 3 to 4 feet of width in my garage. I was able to get it nice and close to the wall. I left probably about 3 to 4 inches between the car and the block. So with that, I was able to move the Raptor over, and I left a lot of space on the far side now. So when the snow comes and I put all my snow removal equipment there, I have plenty of room to get it in and out. Car's nice and protected. It's not going to get dirty, dusty, anything on it while it's sitting here for the next about 4 months or so. Dollies worked out good. Car sits on them nicely. Only issue I had was this floor has a little bit of a texture on it with the polyaspartic coating. It was a little bit harder to push it than I thought. I had to have somebody help me. Wasn't too bad though. We got it over. But other than that, there was no issues. I had no problems running the battery tender through the fender vent on the Shelbys. This here, real simple just to run it up through there. I was very careful, but it was very, very simple, very easy to do. Now the hood's closed and the battery tender's hooked up. So I'll leave it there on the ground, and I got it hooked up to my timer now. So right now I have it programmed every day. It's gonna come on for an hour and top off the battery, and then it'll shut off again. So this is how I've stored all my other cars, and this is the first time storing my 350R like this, but I think this is the pretty good way to store it. It opened up some room in here. It's self-sufficient. The battery will stay charged, and I was able to give myself a little bit more room for the Raptor now. So if anyone's looking for some ideas to store their car over the winter time if you live in a northern climate, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.